did religion play in the conquest of Africa?
Well, it played a key role because it came in with brotherhood. And the Africans believed in brotherhood. It came in one world idea, one great brotherhood. And of course, this, although there were some states that resisted this, saw through it for a long time. And for example, remember the eternal Martyrs. You'd never forget them, because when you can't generalize for the continent, you see, because we're not talking about one nation, we're talking about a continent of people, you see. Have to keep that in mind every minute when you're talking about Africa, that you're talking about a continent. And we generally talk as though we're talking about one nation. We're talking about a continent made up of many nations. Okay, there were those who saw through the trick of religion as it was presented by both Islam and Christianity, and resisted both. The Martyr state was a great example of this. And there were others who resisted for a while, but eventually gave in because trade was a great attraction. Say, okay, you want to let us in? Well, can you let us trade around your borders here? And they established trading posts all around your borders, and gradually, we got in. But surely you let the Christians come in with the, they just want to preach to you about the same God that you believe in. Just want to show you there's one God over all.
But it was all trickery.
Found this one.
But it was all trickery.
Yes, it turned out to be nothing but trickery. Now, I would not say that this was a grand design of trickery. They just saw there was the traders were shrewd enough to see, the explorers, the conquerors were shrewd enough to see that if they carried the missionaries in, they wouldn't have to go in fighting. Missionaries in trade as the first bait would make their pathway easier. I would call it, and have called it, the blacks' naivety, the blacks' gullibility, the blacks' over quest for brotherhood. For as I pointed out in a number of places, we were always the brotherhood seekers. We were always the brotherhood seekers. And this has been our main downfall. It never was the reverse. The whites only sought brotherhood or pretended brotherhood, or the Asians only pretended brotherhood. And when they saw an advantage of economic and political rule as an ultimate outcome.
Why is it that you always hear about European invasion of Africa, but very little about the Asian and the other groups that you mentioned?
Because the Europeans were the last. Colonialism is uppermost in our mind. Colonialism has just been, that is, political colonialism, I put it that way, has just been destroyed. Economic colonialism still persists in Africa. So the European hold on Africa was politically broken when they began to become free and set up their own government. However, as I also point out in my writing, that Africa is only half free, and I would hardly call it half free, when it's only politically free. It will not be free until it's economically free. So long as the economy is still under the control of foreigners, then its government is under the control of foreigners. It was unfortunate that blacks in the United States are still, like their African brothers, absorbed with the idea that politics is their salvation. Politics is not the salvation of the blacks. Politics is only one aspect. Without the other, you're nothing, and that is economic power. Economic power controls the politician. The politician acts and is controlled by the economic power of this nation. of any nation. That's where the power lies.
When you hear that phrase, the black people's need for brotherhood, especially for us pertaining in America, what is that like? How do you perceive that our need for brotherhood?
Well, there are a bunch of different ways that I was thinking about it. So,
Okay.
I'll just say the one that's lingered in my head the longest. And it was, kind of from a negative connotation in terms of our current position. Um, but I think it goes back to our inability to really move how we need to move. Um, when I hear need for brotherhood, and I'm struggling to remember how he mentioned it in the clip, but when I hear that phrase, I think about how black people grew up or how black people developed. Our societies has been well known and established. Most African societies develop in a very social environment,
Mm-hmm.
with a need for being accepted for a level of status that in the world that we exist in has been used against us. Um, and it's quite, it's contrary to the world that Europeans developed in, or that a lot of the white
Mm-hmm.
societies developed in, where it was a land of scarcity, resources kind of determined status. In a lot of African societies and a lot of these things we bring forward, it was kind of the reverse. Status determined resources. So I think we have a situation now where, because the people at the top understand that resources determine status, but we're still programmed in a way that says status determines resources, we're
Mm-hmm.
driven to agree with the masses and do whatever we can to maintain a level of social status outside of doing what we need to do to acquire the resources that would allow us to self-actualize. Um, and so that's one way I think about it in terms of it being a negative, because we don't exist in a world currently where brotherhood in the way that we know it and understand it is something that's positive. Because you think about, like, we always talk about how we're defined by our lowest common denominators,
Yeah.
and how we're excited about being accepted by the masses in our community, being hood. BNPC talked about this the other day. Proud ignorance, arrogant ignorance. Man, I don't read that shit. You know what I'm saying, man? You be reading all these books and all these studies and shit, man. I don't do none of that shit. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is how we talk. Like, we proud of being illiterate and ignorant and unwell read. And I think it all goes back to um what I just spoke about in terms of, in our community, the way that we view the world. Status determines resources, and we're living in a world where resources for everybody else determine status. So while they're battling to get resources to maintain power and control, we're battling to get status. The shit just ain't working out all that well.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, and we want to wear our status and project the status because, like you said, the status determine. We think the status determine the resources. So if this person dripped out in Gucci, they got to have money. If you got the Benz or whatever, you got to have, because from the black lens, how we see it, how we see status, how we see resources, how we see wealth, through the lens of entertainers, through the lens of celebrities, athletes, through the lens of just having a lot of money. If you have a lot of money in our community, then you are somebody and you have been accepted by the larger society, the larger community. Now, it also makes me think about I saw the
Well,
Clarence
hold
Thomas
on, Joe. I want
documentary.
to add one thing to that.
Go
Hold
ahead.
on, real quick.
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. Um, it was brought to my attention some years ago when I first started reading up on stuff like this, and this is a debate discussion, because I started thinking about it in this terms of, like, this whole thing for me started to really take shape when I first started listening to people talk about the demonization of black men and the masculinization of black women. And so those two worldviews became interesting views in terms of masculine and feminine, being it that um, a lot of people would argue that the feminine worldview is that status determines resources, which is why women are hypergamous. But for men, resources determine status, which is why we're more driven towards acquiring goods that give us a leg up. So that's just another interesting in this position we're in the black community, brotherhood versus sisterhood, resources versus status. It's just another one of those interesting wrinkles to think about. But that's all.
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, I'm writing my point down because I want to go ahead and bring you in, PC, because you come straight from the city of brotherly love. Man, I saw a video. I saw a video either earlier today or yesterday. Somebody walking through some part of Philly where they had a whole bunch of people who was on drugs. They just laid out in the streets, all zombie like. I'm like, man, now we got people in the streets here, but not like that.
But yeah, it's Kensington Beach. KNA is known here. Yeah, you don't want to hang out there.
I see that. So, but what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on what's your thoughts on black people's need for brotherhood, the need to fit in and be accepted by the larger society?
You know, it's funny, right? Because when you said that, good brother of mine, Jeff Weaver, sent me the YouTube video yesterday that I was watching. So I was looking that up as y'all were talking about it. And the video is called Inside the Middle Class. And it was
the
collection of videos. You've seen that?
Well, I haven't watched it. I was about to watch it today. I saw the video. It popped up on my timeline.
Right. So, and it spoke about black people who, especially from a privileged class, the middle class, who grew up around white folk or who grew up in pretty affluent black neighborhoods and communities. And it talked about how they no longer considered themselves black, or when they referred to black people, they would always use the term they, those people. And their whole thing was they wanted to be just as good as white folk. That was their gold standard. That was their ruler. That was their yardstick. And because of that, they were willing to abstain any connection to the lower parts of the black community. And when I say lower parts, I mean social, economic parts of the black community. They wanted nothing to do. And this really speaks to the notion of, even if they're not part of the Jack and Jill Boulay societies, they aspire to be so. And if you know about the Boulay Society, the Boulay Society was a replica of the Skull and Bones fraternity out of Yale. So they were aspiring for power. They wanted power, but they, like I said, the yardstick, the ruling was white folk. And because they did that, they wanted to separate themselves from the rest of the black community. But they came to acknowledge that no matter what they did, they couldn't do enough to get white folk to see them as brothers. And it takes me to that coin that was patented years ago when the brother was laying on it, was on one knee, and in a begging pose, in the saying goes, "Am I not a brother?" In other words, begging for brotherhood, as if this white man was God, as if this white man was something to worship. And epigenetically speaking, we've seen that. We've seen even this generation of black people. I'm not black, I'm OJ. You know, we've seen a lot of that in regards to how we see each other. And I think that kills the ability for us to see brotherhood within one another. Because why would I want to be brotherhood with a nigga? I'm not a nigga, you a nigga. And I don't mess with niggas. And I don't want to be associated with niggas. In fact, if I could buy something, I would wash this nigga skin off. And we see it hitting with the whole conversation around when you talk white. There's some truth to that. If you talk nasally,
the tonality.
If you try to talk in terms of being non-threatening, because you don't use the typical baseline, because black people typically speak from their stomach. We don't speak nasally like this. We don't speak from our noses like this unless we're really trying to sound articulate and smart and non-threatening. And we don't want the white folks to run off when they see us coming. So we're put on glasses.
I don't know what they're talking about. They're not with me.
We want to dress khakis, and we want to look sometimes, you know, because we just want to fit in. And we're just one of the guys.
Yeah, sound like the no-neck dude from last week.
Right.
Yeah.
Harry Eldon.
Yeah.
And that's exactly, that Negro should be the poster child of what we're talking about tonight.
No, I got one better.
Oh,
Clarence Thomas.